Hi. Well, you're wondering why I'm late. What a joke. This is hilarious. It's 3:39 on my clock, and I've already done 39 minutes of Facebook Live. Really, Mary Jo? We didn't see you. Well, you didn't see me because I forgot to hit start. Oh, please give me strength. Anyway, now I get to start all over again, and that's fine because I got to practice for 39 minutes. And hi, Samantha, I'm glad that you're here. So I hope some of you will come back again, or you can watch the replay. And I apologize. I also know I'm not the first person who's done this. It's pretty easy to kind of get so excited about your topic that you jump into it, and the next thing you know, you realize you haven't hit start. So here's the beginning. I'll start all over again. The other night, I was watching the 1933 version of Little Women. It's in black and white, of course, and it starred Katharine Hepburn as Jo, and I loved it. Oh, I just enjoyed it so much. I had read Little Women. I still have my copy. Here it is. Here's my copy of Little Women. I'd read Little Women 100 times, and I'd watched several of the movies, and I actually recently watched the opera of Little Women. It was on Prime Video, actually, on Amazon Prime. So I'm a Little Women fan, and I'm not alone. There's still lots and lots of Little Women fans out there. Hi, Patty. Nice to see you here. Well, you're wondering whatever prompted me to all of a sudden get back into thinking about Little Women and wanting to watch this 1933 version with Katharine Hepburn. And it's because I recently finished a book called Meg, Jo, Beth, and Amy, and Why Little Women Still Matters. It's a book by Anne Ryu, and it's a fascinating book. The most interesting part of it are the ways in which Louisa May Alcott was a brilliant entrepreneur. She sold so many books and repurposed so many books and had a series that she ultimately died a millionaire. She was in her mid-50s. She died of a stroke, so she didn't even have a terribly long writing career, but she died a millionaire solely from the sale of her books. She didn't inherit any money. The rest of her family was very poor. They lived on. She basically supported her family, supported her parents and her sisters. So she made this extraordinary living that certainly at that time, writing and selling her books. Hi, I'm Dr. Mary Jo Wagner, the Unstuck Coach, and you're watching Tapping and More. That's my Facebook Live show, and it helps women with women entrepreneurs. We go through a little bit of tapping around psychological and emotional issues that keep women entrepreneurs from moving forward. And today, we're focusing on what I've learned about Louisa May Alcott, and that's about overwhelm, it's about focus, and it's about repurposing. And of course, Louisa May Alcott certainly had never heard the word repurposing. That's ridiculous. But she did. She was a queen of repurposing, and I'll talk about that in a little while. So before we get started, I would love for you to go below the video, click like, share the video. I hope you can tell all the people that I told to come and watch that we're on now and that I just never clicked live. I can't believe I didn't start. Anyway, we're going to go forward and not worry about what happened in the past. So I want to start by telling you a little bit about Louisa May Alcott and her life and how she came to become a millionaire selling her books. Louisa's father, Bronson Alcott, was a relatively well-known transcendentalist. Unless you're in American history, you might not have heard of him, but you would have heard of his buddy, Ralph Waldo Emerson, who was also a transcendentalist, and Thoreau, of Walden Pond fame, another transcendentalist. And these were men who were not great businessmen, to put it mildly. They were philosophers, in a sense. It's the best way to describe it in our terms today. And Bronson and a friend of his decided that they would do a experimental living community and they called it Fruitlands, and they were going to grow all their own crops. They were going to grow all their own food. They were early vegans. They didn't use the word vegan, but they were vegans. They took vegan to absolutely to extremes, a very restricted diet. Now, the problem with this plan was that neither of them knew the first thing about farmers. Remember, I told you they're philosophers. Philosophers usually don't know a lot about farming. So it was not a success at all, went bankrupt, and Louisa May Alcott's mother got so worried about feeding her children that she took her girls and left Bronson. Eventually, Bronson realized that Fruitlands wasn't going to prosper at all, and Louisa May Alcott's mother took him back, and he lived with the family. In fact, he and Louisa May Alcott, his oldest daughter, died within 2 days of each other. And in some ways, certainly Louisa May Alcott felt that her father was a good person, but by the standards of that day, he was a complete disaster as the breadwinner. Now, we're talking 1840s, 1850s, you know, in the middle of the 19th century. And here's a man who cannot support his family. And Louisa May Alcott's mother was kind of poorly, and she had these sisters and so forth. So Louisa May said to herself, all right, this is it. I will be the breadwinner. And she saw herself as the man of the house, and she would earn the money to support her sisters and her parents. And that's exactly what she did. And she proceeded to do that throughout the rest of her life, throughout the Civil War, and then on to the mid-50s when she died. She died in her mid-50s of a stroke. So she started out as her writing career, writing junk, writing trash, writing what we would consider today probably soft porn. In that day, it probably was actually considered pornography. It was very lurid, sensational, kind of a lot of kind of sexual passion around it. And she wrote all these stories for a newspaper that's the closest I can come to describing it today is it was the mid-19th century's version of the National Enquirer. Okay, and it had all this, a lot of, in addition to news and drama all over the news, it had these lurid potboiler stories. And every time she wrote a story for Frank Leslie's illustrated newspaper, she got $50. So that in those days, that was a lot of money if you kept adding $50 to another $50, and you wrote story after story after story. And she said at one point, Frank Leslie has such a need for fiction that I will never run out of being able to support us by writing for this newspaper. And she continued to do that for a number of years. And she's quite young, late teens, early 20s when she's doing this. So eventually, someone said to her, you know, I think that you should write children's stories. She goes, I don't want to write children. I'm really not interested in writing stories for children. She never wanted to marry. She never did marry. She never wanted children of her own. She wasn't interested in that at all. And she argued about writing children's books. And then her friends, and I think her father too, kept kind of pressuring about it. And you have to remember at the time that the most popular children's books, especially books for girls, had as a main character a kind of sappy little girl, not very interesting little girl, not very adventuresome little girl, who either was really sweet and obeyed her parents, and then she would be rewarded in the end because she would go to heaven when she died, or the reverse of the little girl who never mended her ways and was so naughty that she came down with a dreadful disease like scarlet fever, for example, and died. And then, you know, we as the reader can guess whether she went to heaven or she went to hell. You can imagine how dreadful these stories were. And there were oodles and oodles of them. And they sold like hotcakes. So obviously Louisa May Alcott is not going to write something like this. She's been writing all this trash, this soft porn for Frank Leslie's illustrated newspaper. She's not going to turn around and write this kind of sappy stuff. But she finally agrees that she will write a children's book. It'll be a book about girls. In fact, why not write an autobiography? So basically, Little Women is very autobiographical, and the character of Jo is, of course, is Louisa May Alcott herself. Um, so she gets the book finished, and she sends it to a publisher. First run was 2,000 copies, which in that day was a fairly substantial number, and it sold out almost immediately. It was a huge, huge bestseller. People loved this book. So they wanted a sequel. Now, this is a very interesting thing, because Louisa May Alcott is now making money following her passion. In fact, writing all that trash was following her passion, because she loved to write. So her passion was writing. She followed her passion. But she also kept track of her market. Now, this is a very interesting piece, because the market was very interested. At the end of the first part of Little Women, Little Women was originally published in 2 parts. So now my book has both parts. It's part 1 and part 2. And probably if you read Little Women, you would have read part 1 and part 2 in one book. But it first came out as in parts. So at the end, everyone wants to know who Jo is going to marry. And of course, everyone wants her to marry Laurie. After all, he's their neighbor, their best friends. He's got tons of money. He's going to inherit a lot of money, has a wonderful business ahead of him. She could live the life of luxury, but does that sound like Jo? No, of course not. So Louisa May Alcott has her turn down the proposal, and her fans are outraged. So now here's this woman whose goal is to make money writing, and she's made her fans, she's made her niche market, we would call it, very angry because Jo turned down this proposal. So what she does with it is she goes halfway, and I think this is a very interesting perspective. All right, my fans and my niche market doesn't really like this, but if I go over here, it's not who I am, and I need to be authentic. So she comes over to the middle to be authentic, and she originally would never have had Jo marry. Jo was, after all, her, and she didn't want to marry. She wasn't going to have Jo marry. But she realizes if she's going to continue selling books and she's going to do a sequel, she's going to have Jo marry. So Jo marries, as you may remember, a kind of frumpy older man. He's a German professor. There's nothing dashing about him. He has no money. He's kind of, down in the heels. Kind of a lovable old teddy bear, but certainly not someone that a young woman would want to marry. But Louisa May Alcott pleased her audience, pleased her fans, her niche market, by saying, okay, if you insist that Jo get married, fine, I'll marry him off. And she marries him off. Now, feminist literary critics, women's studies literary critics, have dissected Little Women a gazillion times. I was absolutely amazed at the number of some of these women I actually knew from my career in women's studies, and all of them I knew of, and they're big names in English departments and doing literary criticism around women's books. And some of them thought that it was really a cop-out for her to have Jo marry. Others of them said, she did the right thing, because she went ahead and followed through with what her fan base wanted. But at the same time, Jo ends up in a marriage in which she and her husband are equal partnership. And together, they run a boarding school for boys. And Jo is very, very involved in the running of it, and very much as an equal partner to her husband. So this was kind of moving out of the women's sphere as it would have been in the middle of the 19th century. What's interesting about her career is she only wrote one book that she liked, and I would guess that most of you have never heard of it. The book is called Work. It was a nonfiction book about her experience as a nurse during the Civil War. Now, she came out of, when you look at her background, she came out of an experience in which you would guess she might step out of kind of the women's role. Certainly nursing in the Civil War was somewhat a women's role, although many women would not be encouraged to leave home and to go to a army hospital, which is what she did. But she stepped out by going to, even in Little Women, she steps out by going to New York to work. Girls didn't do that into the middle in the 1860s. Anyway, back to work. This book, you can still get it, but it certainly is. I don't think it's in. I think it's probably out of print again. It was in print for a little while during the height of literary criticism and women's studies, but I don't think it's in print anymore. And it certainly wasn't a bestseller. And it was the only book that she wrote that she really liked. You know, she was really proud of that book. But she kept writing to her market. So the market said, all right, we really like this book a lot, and could you do another book? So she did the second part of Little Women, and at the end of the second part of Little Women, pretty soon they're asking for more, and so then she wrote Little Men, and then she wrote Jo's Boys. So that was the kind of the trilogy around the March family of the, you know, Meg, Jo, Beth, and Amy group. But then after that, she would write Eight Cousins and Rosenblum and on and on, a whole bunch of books in that general genre of books for preteen and teenage girls, and everybody's reading them. I mean, boys are reading them, and adult women were reading them, and they became more and more and more popular, and she sold more and more copies. Of Little Women itself, just of Little Women, millions of copies were sold. It has never gone out of print, which I find very amazing. Never. Since 1868. It's 150 years old now. It's never been out of print. And it has been published in 50 languages. Language are like tag-along. Languages, you can kind of see it published in Western Europe, for example. It wouldn't be a story that was that far out of touch with, say, young women in France, for example. It was also very popular in England. Obviously, it didn't have to be translated in England, but when you look at some of it, was translated in Chinese, it was translated in Japanese, on and on and on. It's been translated in every language you can possibly imagine. Now, I'm sure that most of the copies in those languages are no longer available. But Little Women itself, in English, as I said before, it has never gone out of print, and there are oodles and oodles of editions of it. It went through, I don't know how many different illustrators, and even the history of the illustration is interesting, because in the beginning, the girls are dressed in fairly plain, slightly, very proper, but slightly shabby clothes because the family was poor. And then by the time you come along with further iterations of it, the story stays the same. And they're all dressed up in these very elegant, fancy Victorian dresses, which, of course, as a family, they would never have had the money to buy. So those are some kind of interesting pieces about it. So it was repurposed during her lifetime. It was repurposed by languages. It was repurposed by different editions. It was repurposed with having new illustrations. It was repurposed as it ran in a series. There were versions of it that were simplified for younger children to read. So it had a lot of different versions while she was still alive. She made sure that if there was any way she could make more money off of Little Women, she would do that. And as I said earlier, she was the sole support of her family practically from the time that she could write a story until her death. And several critics have suggested that when we talk about her being a millionaire, actually she would have been a multimillionaire by our standards, by following her passion, by staying on focus, and by repurposing. So I want to back up a little bit and talk about some of this repurposing, because I find it with Little Women, it's one of the most interesting cases of repurposing. Now, in the later versions of repurposing, which I'm going to talk to you a little bit about, obviously she didn't make any money. Her heirs didn't make any money. I would imagine that the people who are making money now off of her books, the publishers, they're getting all the money. The money is not going back to any of Louisa May Alcott's relatives. But now it's still being repurposed. It is still today being repurposed. So I did an internet search. You can buy t-shirts, Little Women t-shirts. You can buy Little Women coffee mugs. You can buy Little Women sticky notes. You name it. and it's something has been made around Little Women that someone's making money off of, magnets. The house that the Alcotts lived in, Orchard House, which is in Concord, of course, has a gift shop. And guess what's in the gift shop? All this stuff, this repurposed stuff around Little Women. So people are still making a ton of money off of something that's still extremely popular. So if you look at productions of it, there are several movies. There was a new movie, BBC and PBS broadcasted last spring, of Little Women. I thought it was dreadful, but that's neither here nor there. I couldn't even watch the whole thing. It was too modern for me. Yes, obviously, if I liked the 1933 version, you might guess it was too modern for me. But there are, I think, 4 or 5 movies. There's an opera. Yes, I've watched the opera. I'm an opera person. So yes, I've watched the opera and I enjoyed it a lot. There was a ballet. There have been plays. So there are all kinds of productions that have been made off Little Women. And the movies are still available. They're still being shown. I mean, I found the 1933 version on Amazon Prime. I rented it for $3 or something. I mean, all of that's there. The opera, although not performed too often, partly because of it's relatively short, and operas are usually pretty long, so it would have to be paired with another opera if it were to be done at the Met, for example. But it is still performed. It's relatively recent, and every once in a while you see a new performance of it. I don't know about the ballet. I haven't heard much about the ballet. I don't know much about that. But all the movies are still being watched and so still being seen. So it's still out there and people are still buying it. It's still in print. As marketers, I don't know that I don't know that I would ever be that successful, but I find her lessons around marketing extremely interesting. I also found her absolutely fascinating. I want to go on with the marketing, but I have to interrupt for this. I found it absolutely fascinating that she was involved in absolutely every possible reform movement you can imagine. So at this period of time, around the time of the Civil War, especially in New England, there were lots and lots of reform movements, one of which, of course, was anti-slavery. And the Alcott house, where she grew up, and she was there during this time, the Alcott house was on the Underground Railroad. She was a suffragist. She was the first woman registered to vote in Concord, Massachusetts. So she was involved in all of these causes and all of these issues that were very outside the mainstream of American society. And yet at the same time, she was writing this book that everyone loved. Well, not everyone. Christian evangelicals did not like this book at all. Because in Little Women, nobody goes to church. If you'll remember, Little Women opens with the girls and Marmee on Christmas. They don't go to church on Christmas. In fact, I don't think there's anywhere in any of her books that anybody goes to church. The Alcotts didn't go to church. The Transcendentalists weren't church people, to put it mildly. So Christian evangelicals were considerably upset about this, and they were upset about some other things, like Jo going off to New York by herself and living in a rooming house all alone and so forth. There were lots of things that did not please this market, so they banned it. Now, what do we know about banned books? Nothing sells a book faster than having it banned. Whenever libraries, I think in the spring sometime, a lot of libraries will do that display around banned books, and you can go and look at all the covers of all these banned books, and the sales of all those books go up immediately. Everybody wants to read the banned books. So part of her, I don't know that this was a conscious marketing decision, but it certainly played into the market, and that was controversy. Controversy sells. So if you truly alienate part of your market or part of what might be your market, but probably not close to your heart, but at least out there on the fringes, and you alienate them, you end up selling more because controversy sells. So let's take a look at how these lessons that we get from her, she focused. She never went off and did something else. She wrote. And when the book was repurposed in her lifetime, I think there were doilies or antimacassars, you know, those things that they put on the edges of chairs and the backs of chairs and stuff. And some of those may have been made. There may have been a couple things like that that were made during her lifetime. She did not make them. She didn't have anything to do with it. Her focus was writing. And then when she discovered that the story around these families, the story around the March family was such a hot seller, she zeroed in on that, and she focused and kept writing and wrote two more books on just about that family. She stayed right on track with blinders. She wrote every day. And she's still following her passion, which was always to be writing. She stayed authentic to herself by saying, all right, I'll compromise in this way, but I'm still going to go off in a way that feels right to me. So she didn't veer so far off that it was no longer authentic. And there's nothing that kills a business quicker than a niche market figuring out that the person selling just isn't very authentic. It doesn't seem very real, and that doesn't sell very well. So I don't know that she knew that that's what she was doing. She was just a very strong person, and that was what she would choose to do. But she was able to take this market and build it into a way that made a lot of money. Now, I want to talk a little bit about overwhelm and lack of focus, because that's one of the things that gets in the way right now for women entrepreneurs. It gets in my way. I'll be really honest with you. It certainly gets in my way. And I know that it gets in the way of a lot of others, is that getting overwhelmed. I can do this, but I've got that to do, and I've got a to-do list that's got 103 things on it. And oh, look, maybe instead of doing Facebook Live, well, maybe I should be creating a course. I'll create a course, and I won't be doing Facebook Live. I'll go off in this other direction. So we don't focus. We get so overwhelmed. There's all of these different things that we can do. Now, yes, her world was a simpler world. She didn't have the internet for starters. Thank heaven. She didn't have a typewriter. So it was a simpler world. So it was easier to focus. But I certainly know people in this world today who focus, who only write, or who focus on 2 or 3 things within their business. They don't do 10 or 12. They don't do all the stuff that we can do. They've learned how to focus. And the overwhelm and lack of focus, of course, keep us from receiving money, keep us from bringing in money. And I would argue that in a sense, it isn't all the fault of the internet. It is part of where we're coming from. It's our resistance to business. It's our resistance, our inner resistance, the stuff that we've learned as children. It's our inner resistance to having a thriving business. And what helped Louisa May Alcott was, in fact, her father promoted her doing what she wanted to do. He was very, very supportive of her being an author and very supportive of her making money. I mean, it certainly helped because he wasn't making money, but he could have been a typical Victorian and said, no, women aren't supposed to be making money, and you're not supposed to be writing for money, and so forth. And he never did that. He supported it 100%. So she didn't get that message as a child that it's not okay to be a businesswoman. And many of us, especially if you're as old as I am, you were making decisions about your life. Pre-feminism, you got those messages and you had to kind of untangle from those. So that's not being entirely fair to her, because she didn't get those messages, but she got those messages from the larger society. Most of the world were not transcendentalists. Women were staying at home, doing what women were supposed to be doing, cooking, cleaning, and having kids, and the men were out working. So Bronson Alcott was kind of stood apart from the average person. But let's look at repurposing, because I think that there's an inner reason that a lot of us hesitate to do that. Now, repurposing is simply, for those of you who are wondering exactly what I mean by that, repurposing is simply taking the content that you have and marketing it in a different way. So let's suppose you have a whole bunch of blog posts. You can put those blog posts together and make a Kindle book out of it. Now you've got a Kindle book. You can repurpose it as a Create Space book that's a book in your hand. You can sell it at the back of the room. You can do videos off of your books. Sometimes, actually, this video that I'm doing now, this Facebook Live video that I'm doing now, is repurposed content that's on my blog. Is it the same thing? No, because I'm not reading it. So I've added stuff to this. So if you went back to my blog and read it on my blog, it would be a little bit different, but it's basically the same thing. I'm repurposing it. It doesn't make sense not to. And I think that we don't repurpose for all kinds of reasons, but one of them is that we don't feel on some level we're good enough. We don't feel our stuff is good enough. Well, you know, I wrote this Kindle book and it just was a bunch of my blog posts and I don't know, they weren't very good and I didn't go back and edit it and I don't know. Never mind. It was a good idea to make a Kindle book, but no, I don't think my stuff's good enough. So I'm going to do something else now. So we look at our stuff. We think we aren't enough. So therefore we think our stuff isn't enough. Our stuff isn't good enough. So if our stuff isn't good enough, then what's the point in repurposing it over and over and over again? The same thing happens with shiny object syndrome. You know what shiny object syndrome is? That's where every little while some new piece of software comes along or some new book comes along or some new way of doing something comes along, some new platform for doing blog posting. It's endless. If you follow this stuff at all, you can jam up your email with all this new stuff that comes out day after day after day after day. So when people fall for that, it's called shiny object syndrome. So yes, that's part of being distracted and part of overwhelm if you're just looking at this from a thought process. But if you're looking at it from an inner process, it's more complicated than that. And I'll tell you why. It's more complicated than that because that's more of, I'm not good enough. Oh, well, my website is on WordPress, but here's a new shiny, different platform for I'll use that. Mine isn't good enough. Because on some level, every new thing that comes along carries with it the suggestion that what you're already doing isn't enough, or it isn't right, or it could always be better. Now, does that mean everything that comes along is you don't need is garbage? Of course not. No, that's extreme. But if you look at if I look at the amount of stuff that comes into my inbox, I'm not very good at cleaning up my inbox. I need to do that. That's something else, not for this afternoon. There's a lot of it that is hyped up to let you think that you have to have this because what you're doing now isn't enough. It isn't good enough. It isn't fast enough. It isn't efficient enough. This will make you more money. That will make you more money. So those are the biggies, are these promotions for new ways of doing things and new pieces of software and new programs and so forth that will make you more money. Now I can tell you right now, if you're watching this because you're struggling with money and you've been struggling with money for a long time in your business, another new program, another new book, another new whatever that comes along, another new piece of software is not going to solve your financial problem. It just isn't, because that's on the outside and what's going on is on the inside. So that is my story of connecting what we're doing now, lack of focus, feeling overwhelmed, and a resistance to repurposing what we've already got. We're always trying, instead of repurposing what we've already got, is going out there and creating new. And all of these lessons really come from I think, come very much from Louisa May Alcott's business model. She wouldn't have had a business model. She just knew in her head that she was going to make money, and she focused on doing that by writing. She certainly didn't have a business plan, but it comes from those lessons. And she wouldn't have done any of the repurposing of her books on her own. The publishers are pushing her to do that. So when a new edition comes out or a new illustrator comes out, that would have come from the publisher. But it's still an example of repurposing. And what she did within herself in terms of repurposing was to follow the March family into Little Men, and then to follow Little Men into Jo's Boys. So she was repurposing, in a sense, that story, enlarging that story and continuing that story. And these are lessons, I think, that are going, if we take them in, can help our business a lot. So that's the end of me blathering along about Louisa May Alcott, one of my very favorite authors in the first place, and then turns out now she's one of my favorite women entrepreneurs. Willa Cather's another one, but we'll do a show on Willa Cather later, because she was also a brilliant businesswoman, but in a different way than Louisa May Alcott. So I think it's time to do some tapping. You ready to tap? Okay, so we're going to tap on feeling overwhelmed and not being able to focus and not wanting to keep working our stuff along, keep repurposing it, because it's just not good enough. And we just haven't produced anything that's good enough or that's worth it. And we need to keep looking for something new and looking for something bigger and looking for something shinier, looking for something that's going to make even more money. So as you remember, we always start tapping on the negative. Now, keep in mind that this video will stay here on Facebook. It will go over on YouTube. It will be a number of different places, and you can come back and keep tapping. And I encourage you to do that. Tapping is not a quick cure. You need to be consistent with it. And you also need to get comfortable enough with it and familiar enough with it that you can start putting your own situation into it. Because when I do the tapping with you, there are lots of you on this, and I'm doing it in a very generic way. I can't do it individually for each one of you. So I have to do it in a way that kind of works for a group. And that's not as effective as if you can make it personal to yourself. So tap enough that you get comfortable with it. Remember that you can't really botch it up. You know, if you miss a point, it doesn't matter. If you aren't right on the point, it doesn't matter. Don't worry about it. You really can't botch it up. Okay, so you ready? I just looked at what I just wrote. It's not very good. I don't know whether I should put it on my blog or not, publish it, put it out there. I looked at my marketing materials, and I don't know. I guess they're okay. Maybe I should have them redone. I'll hire another designer. I'll send them to another press. My stuff just isn't very good. And, you know, I guess I have thought about writing, and I could put some writing on a Kindle book. A lot of people do that. I guess it's simple, but I don't think my stuff is really good enough. Now, I'm not going to do that. You know, I do have some material that I did kind of publish it on my website, and I even used it as an opt-in. But you know, I don't know about making a book out of it. Ooh, I don't think so. No, I'll start all over again. I'll write something new. If I just write something new, that'll be better. I don't want to use this old stuff. It wasn't very good. I just wasn't very smart then. I think I know a little more now. I'll do something new. Oh, okay. I just looked at what I wrote. This new piece I wrote, you know, it's not very good. I don't know that it's any better than what I wrote before. I just don't think I have my act together. I don't think I'm smart enough to do this. Maybe I should hire a writer. Maybe I should have somebody do it for me, and certainly hire people to do all this for me, because you know, how I do it, it's not very good. And I wish I were better at it. And I wish that but I'm just not. You know, I'm going to honor these feelings. I'm just going to honor that I feel like I'm not enough and what I do just isn't very good. If it were better, if it were really great, I'd be a millionaire, and I'm not. So it's just proof that I'm just not very good at what I do. I'm just not enough. I don't know enough. I don't do enough. I just can't do enough. Oh, ooh, 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 ick. The negative stuff is always kind of so depressing and such a downer. Wow. So I hope that you are ready now to do positive tapping. Before we start the positive tapping, I have to remind you, I'm going to remind you on every single Facebook Live, I have to remind you that the negative is the most important. It is the negative that releases all that emotion, all that negativity that we carry with us. So all that negativity has emotion attached to it. It can make us depressed. It can cause overwhelm. It can cause us to not be focused and run over into this, to do this and do that, and to jump all over the place. All of that comes from this negative emotion. And tapping on this negative helps neurologically, physically, neurologically, emotionally, and within your body to release that negative emotion. So when you do this on your own, please do, if you only have time for one round, do the negative. If you have more time, do the negative 2 or 3 times before you start doing the positive. Okay, so after that little sermon about negativity and releasing negativity, let's do some positive tapping. Well, I honor that I feel like I'm not enough. I honor that I feel like my stuff is garbage. That's how I feel. I guess that's what I believe. But you know, I'm open. I'm open to considering just a little bit. I'm open to considering that maybe what I just wrote is pretty good. Maybe what I'm doing is better than I think it is. Maybe what I just wrote is worth publishing, or it's worth putting up on my blog. It's worth putting out there. I don't have to get somebody else to do it for me. I'm doing good work. I know what I'm doing. I'm smart. I've been, I've got a lot of experience behind me. And I need to honor that. I need to honor that actually this notion that I'm not enough and that I'm stupid and that my stuff is terrible, well, that's ridiculous. That's not true. I'm open to starting to reconsider how I think about myself. That, in fact, what I'm doing is pretty good. Oh, it can probably be improved, but that doesn't mean it's awful. And if I don't improve it, well, the next piece I do, it'll be better. And if it's not, that's fine. But I can just keep going along, getting better as I go along, appreciating the work that I've done, acknowledging the work that I've done, congratulating myself for the work I've done, celebrating, bravo, I finished it, I did it, I'm posting it, I'm publishing it, I'm putting it out there. Look at these marketing materials. They're pretty good. I'm proud of myself. I'm doing a good job. I'm doing the very best I can right now. Now, in the future, maybe I'll be able to do better because that's just kind of how it works. But I know that I'm able to do good stuff, that I'm good stuff, that I can take this in. I can acknowledge that everything's okay with me. I can acknowledge that my work is good. I can acknowledge that I can go ahead and publish it or put it out there or do whatever it is that I want to with it, that I could do Facebook Live, or that I could do other videos, that I can do all of these things that other people are doing. I can do it and do a good job at it. Oh, some of it I've never done before. It'll take a little practice. I can practice. That's okay. And maybe the first ones won't be as good as the next ones will be, but that's okay too. What I'm doing is good. All of my stuff is basically good because I'm a worthy person and I do good work. And I need to congratulate myself, to celebrate, to be proud of myself, to take it in, to follow that example of Louisa May Alcott, to focus, to stop being so overwhelmed, to stay with my passion, and to know that I can be a successful businesswoman. Okay. So the problem with Facebook Live is I can't see you. So you can get away without tapping. Sometimes we'll have to do this as a webinar so that I can see that you're actually tapping, because I've got a secret to tell you. You ready for the secret? Tapping is completely and totally ineffective and does not work if you don't tap. So in order to make tapping work for you, you really need to tap, and you need to tap consistently. And I have recommended tapping once a day, but I'd recommend even 2 or 3 times a day. It doesn't take very long. It just doesn't take very long, but you're getting that a new neurological pattern. This isn't just some airy-fairy weird kind of thing out there. You're actually establishing a new neurological pattern in the brain and a new neurological pattern that goes on down through your energy system. So it's worth putting the effort in, and it's a lot easier than all kinds of other things that are out there. I've actually dropped some other protocols that I used to use because tapping is as effective, if not more effective, and it's easier. And I love easy. Why make it complicated if you can make it easy? So I appreciate your being here a lot this afternoon. I apologize for not being on time because I didn't turn the start video. I didn't hit the start video. So I actually did Facebook. For those of you who just came on recently, I did 39 minutes of Facebook Live without having clicked the button to start. So nothing happened. So we had to start all over again. So if you were late, lucky you got the whole thing. So tomorrow we're going to start the discussion of what we learned as small children, 4, 5, 6 years old, about money, what we learned about money from our parents, the ways in which that affects how we run our business today, so that we can start tapping to release that. Because that's probably, when people ask me, can I name one thing? Asking to name one thing's a little tricky, but people do ask, and I answer that most of the time, for most people, most of what holds them back is what they learned as children, very young children, from their parents. And there are neurological reasons for that, and I'll talk about that tomorrow. So we're going to talk about that tomorrow, and my story's all about me and my father and my Girl Scout cookies. Oh dear, yes, it's quite a story. So at any rate, let's finish up now, and I'm going to see you tomorrow. If you're interested in finding out what's going on in your business, what are your goals, what is working in your business, what's not working in your business, what should you do next, what should you actually zero in and focus on, how can you figure all that out? If you'd like to work through that with me, I invite you to go to overwhelmedaction.com /clarity, CLARITY. So that's overwhelmedaction.com /clarity. And we get together and take a look at your business, take a look at your goals and so forth, and figure out what the next steps are. So I look forward to seeing you tomorrow. Tell your friends about it. And I promise tomorrow I will be on time by pushing the button that says start video. Have a great evening.